right now, coping with and dealing with the effects of the mass shooting that took place on Tuesday at Robb Elementary School. So again, we mentioned earlier today President Biden's schedule, where he got here around 11 o'clock this morning, landing here at Garner Field, and then went into town again, went to Robb Elementary School, and we could see him touching a photo of each of the victims that was set up at that memorial. And then him and First Lady Jill Biden, along with Governor Greg Abbott and the First Lady of Texas, Cecilia, also came by and dropped off flowers for the victims. And we could hear, when people were at the school, many people were lined up for several hours waiting to also pay their respects to the victims as well. And some people could be heard cheering for the president's arrival. Others were criticizing Governor Greg Abbott, who has come under fire in the past week with a call to change some of the gun control laws here in the state of Texas after it was discovered that the gunman, an 18-year-old, was able to buy the weapons legally. So still a lot of things are unfolding right now, and one of the major developments that we heard earlier today was that the Department of Justice is going to be looking into the response to the shooting. We've reported previously there was a large gap of time where the shooter was inside the classrooms at Robb Elementary while police were waiting outside, and even the Department of Public Safety said in hindsight early on Friday that it was the wrong decision that was made on the scene. So the DOJ says that they are going to conduct an investigation into what exactly transpired there. Now, again, talking about the scene that we're looking at right in front of us, there's been a little bit more movement by the motorcade, and we see some people. It looks like the first responders of this community might be lined up against the side of the hangar bay. From what we can see right now, again, it's a pretty far distance from where we're at to where the president and those first responders are right now, but you can see some nearby ambulances as well, along with the entire motorcade that's out there right now. So if we're going to take a better look here real quick, and yeah, we can see the car backed up to the backside of the hangar, and many people coming here to greet the president and also thank him for visiting as well. Again, capping off a long day where President Biden wanted to come down here, and his press secretary said at the end of last week that he wanted to come and pay the respects and stand united with this community. And some unity is what Uvalde needs right now. Talking with that gentleman I mentioned earlier, he was a grandfather whose granddaughter was in the school but left 15 minutes to the shooting. So for right now, again, we'll just leave you with this live look here at Garner Field as President Biden is, again, making his final remarks before he heads back to Washington. I'll send it back to y'all.
Stand by for us, Troy. As you mentioned, we're going to continue to take that live look at Garner Field as the president arrives to meet with the first responders that arrived on scene on that terrible Tuesday. For now, let's go check in live with
Henry Ramos, who is just about a 5-minute drive from Garner Field. And Henry, you have been in Uvalde since day one. You have spoken with so many families. You have watched the Uvalde Downtown Plaza transform into this really beautiful tribute to these victims. What do you see there today, Henry?
Yeah, that's exactly it, Alicia. I mean, you and I were here just a couple of days ago, and we've just seen this memorial. It just keeps growing. But not only the memorial, the crowd size, people from all over here. I mean, seeing a lot of people from San Antonio that made the drive for hours. There was a line right behind me of people wanting to pay their respects. At the center, we've heard people singing, praying. In fact, they have Bible scriptures written across all along that someone has written across the plaza here. But something I did want to share with you all, because as you mentioned, at this time, a lot of people are trying to do what they can, besides all of these questions that we have and just trying to make sense of it, even if we can't even make sense of what happened. But it's the outpouring and the love and the support that continues here in Uvalde. And I want to show you this shirt here. This is from a San Antonio family, the Garcias and the Munozes here, and they made this shirt. honored. The donations go into the families here. They're wearing them. They're right next to me here, and they're also just wanting to just do what they can to show their support to the families and to this town. And that's just one gesture that we've seen. I mean, even just driving in today and just looking at just all the different memorials that are set up around the community, just besides here being in the heart. I actually went to a memorial not long ago, and it was in front of a daycare center. I mean, if I could just find the words to describe this, moving. A daycare center, and they had all the chairs, 21 chairs for the students, for their teachers, all lined up with their names. They have different messages on there, people coming and showing their messages, paying their respects, doing what they can. And then, of course, all of this, as we've been seeing, as the president is in town, the first lady, making all those different stops. And then you had the big news that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is now going to be independently reviewing the response from law enforcement to this. So many developments, though, but at the heart of it is that people are still here, showing up, trying to do what they can to support this small town. And we've just seen it since day one, since I got on the ground to even to now. And I know that it's not going to stop. It's only going to get bigger, and it's only going to even help more of these families even more. And speaking to some parents out here, they were just saying, if this were my child inside that classroom, I think that's a lot of questions that a lot of people are asking right now. Obviously, we do have, the talks of gun control, that always comes, security, all of those things. And we are going to visit with Texas Senator Gutierrez, Roland Gutierrez, here shortly. We're going to talk to him because he has pushed for Governor Abbott to call a special session so that they can address these issues, obviously about gun control, but also address security issues. We're going to talk to him because he had been mentioning that he wants someone held accountable because of all of these questions that come up in terms of the response from police. We're going to ask him, what does that accountability look like? And is it realistic that we could get a special session? But of course, right behind me, I mean, you can just see the lines continue to grow here. People doing what they can to pay their respects, to show their love for Uvalde.
People have been saddened. There's a lot of grief. And then because of the admission by DPS that there was a made on the scene. What is the mood like now, Henry? Can we go? Okay.
All right, stand by.
I guess let's go to Troy Kless now. Troy, what's the latest there? We know the president looks like he was supposed to arrive there at Garner Field at 5:05. What can you tell us? It looks like there's been some more movement lately. Troy, can you hear us?
Well, while President Biden was visiting, he was not the only visitor that was here in town in Uvalde, where earlier today I was over by Robb Elementary School, where there was a long line that went for at least a block, and there was people waiting several hours to pay their respects to the victims of the shooting last week. Now, I did get to speak to a father and daughter from San Antonio that explained why they wanted to pay their respects. You take a listen here to what they had to say.
We felt compelled to come out here, show our respects for the family, for these children and the families that went through this horrible tragedy, and more than anything to compel and implore our friends and family to get out and vote this November. There has to be changes. This cannot be the status quo. It happens over and over. Republicans have a set agenda, and it does not represent the will of the people. And if you speak to most folks here, I'm sure there's some gun owners here, but I'm pretty sure that to a person, they want sensible laws, stuff that makes sense. An 18-year-old should not have access to an assault weapon that will cause this kind of carnage. And so that's why we're here.
And so you mentioned, politicians, imploring them to do something. We saw President Biden come out here earlier today. I'm not sure if you think one way or another if that's like a moot point that he's out here, since like you said, this keeps happening over and over again, or if you have any thoughts on that particular aspect of it.
It is important for him to be here to comfort the families. From a political standpoint, you can take the position you want, but I'm sure that the families appreciate that he's here. It shows that he cares, that the country cares. And so it's a very good move that he's here. I know he's going to meet with the families, so it's a good thing that he came.
Miranda, you said you're 14, right? So I mean, just you're a school-age kid. I mean, just kind of what's going through your mind as you're seeing everything.
I feel really bad for the families who had to lose their children like that, especially that summer is like almost here for them. I feel terrible for them that they can't experience the rest of their lives, like they can't experience the stuff they were supposed to go through. And their parents are now suffering through the loss of their children. And I agree with him. I agree with my dad, because an 18-year-old should not have a gun, especially if he's not in the right mental state.
Back out here live at Garner Field, where we are still waiting for the president's departure here. And if you want to pan over to my left, again, you can still see some of that motorcade is still waiting on this side of the base over here. And, we could see also on top of that, there were multiple cars lined up along Garner Field Road here that were waiting to see the president's motorcade come through. And again, many people thankful that the president was here in town today as he winds down his visit on, again, what was a very emotional day for this community and likely for the Bidens as well. We'll send it back to y'all.
All right, Troy, thank you very much. We want to send things over right now to KENS 5's Matt Houston. We learned today, at the request of Uvalde Mayor Don McLaughlin, a U.S. Department of Justice critical incident review has been requested to look into law enforcement's response at Robb Elementary School on Tuesday. Matt, what can you tell us about this request? Has this happened maybe in the past?
Yeah, Alicia, it's not a super common thing for the DOJ to come in and sort of conduct an after-action review of local law enforcement's response. It does happen, though, and generally it's reserved for officer-involved shootings. That's when a policeman or woman shoots a suspect, and there's some debate about whether that was the appropriate action to take. Of course, it can also happen when an officer's inaction is worthy of scrutiny, and that is the case here. Of course, you've heard a little bit about law enforcement's response. We know that as many as 19 officers from various agencies were waiting in the hallway at Robb Elementary, even as kids inside the classroom were calling 911, begging for help. They waited, evidently assessing the situation as a barricaded subject and not an active shooter. They have two forms of response there that's going to delay the way that things work and the way that law enforcement responds to that situation. And obviously, lots of scrutiny, and deservedly so. The DOJ's stated purpose here is to come up with an accurate account of what exactly happened Tuesday. They also want to look at best practices and potential lessons learned. It doesn't appear that this is a criminal investigation. In fact, there's no mention of that anywhere in law enforcement's, in the DOJ's response to the mayor's request. So again, not necessarily an investigation, but a review. And that's an important distinction to make, different from how this typically works when the DOJ comes in and looks at how law enforcement handled a particular scenario. They're working with COPS, which is the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. They are not an investigative branch of the DOJ, at least not typically. Normally, their role is to make local law enforcement better. They generally do this with training, grants. They oversee lots of programs. One of those grants in particular is the School Violence Prevention Program, which distributes money for things like locks, metal detectors, floodlights. Again, this is sort of a branch of the DOJ that's supposed to help local law enforcement, not really oversee them or hold them accountable. That's telling. It doesn't necessarily mean that the DOJ is going to come in and change its mind. It reserves the right to come in and say, okay, there were mistakes here and there needs to be some accountability and legal accountability, which could manifest itself as prosecution. But that's not how this investigation is starting based on what we know right now. Again, it's more of a review trying to determine what happened. The mayor on Thursday said that they're still trying to get to the bottom of it. Those were his words, the way he's characterized his work. And that if there are any changes that need to be made as a result of the review, that he's going to push for those. But again, we still need a clear understanding of what happened Tuesday because we've gotten lots of conflicting reports. It appears that Friday's press conference with DPS head Steve McCraw was based on video evidence where they were sort of going through security camera footage, listening for audio for things like gunshots. They can determine when shots were fired based on the time codes of that audio. So you would like to think that this latest account is a little more accurate than what we heard initially, which was largely based on interviews with responding officers, which are, not an exact science. They're not time-stamped, they're estimates. That may explain some of the discrepancies in the first series of reports, but from here on out, they're going to be looking at sort of this hard data, trying to determine exactly what the sequence of events was and how they can better respond in the future. Again, if the DOJ decides that there was some form of negligence here, they could prosecute, but that's not how they're starting this investigation. Stated purpose, determine what happened, determine if there are any best practices or lessons learned that we can take for another scenario like this one. We are scheduled to talk with a former U.S. attorney here in about an hour or so. We're going to have more on that later on in later newscasts here at Ken's, where he can give us an idea of what these investigations look like, what kinds of forensic evidence that the DOJ is interested in, and go from there. For now, we'll send it back to you, Alicia and Phil.
Okay, Matt, thank you. Of course, that DOJ review, once it's finished, will be made public and published. Of course, everybody wants to know what happened, how could this have happened? A lot of unanswered questions. If you're joining us just live right now, on the right side, upper right side of your screen, you're taking a live look. That's Uvalde. That is Garner Airfield, where President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden are meeting with first responders. They're doing that right now. They're scheduled to do that until about 6 o'clock before they leave Uvalde, come back to San Antonio, and then get on Air Force One and go back to Delaware. Right now, let's go back out to the town square. That's where we find Henry Ramos. Henry, you've been talking to a lot of people all week, and I understand you've got somebody that you want to talk to right now.
I do, Phil, and exactly it. And as I've been mentioning just a few minutes ago, I mean, people from all over, but joining me right now is mom and a daughter, Guadalupe Lopez, and this is Ken. If you'll just stand for me right there. And we're live now at Ken's 5, and I appreciate you two having just a candid conversation. Minutes ago, me and Mrs. Lopez, she lives here in Uvalde, has called this home for more than 50 years. Kelly here is her daughter who lives in San Antonio. And I mean, I think what broke me with your mom, as she was telling me in Spanish, was that this is hurting her so much. And I can feel the pain from her right now. I mean, give us that, tell us a little bit about that.
It's hurtful. I mean, my mom, she's my only thing that I have, and she's the only thing I have going on for me. And if I lose her, bear that, and it's hard to see her falling. She's not eating, she's not sleeping because it's taking a toll on her. So I have to come over here and get her, take her back, and we're out walking the malls, we're out having the radio loud, we're just trying to distract ourselves. Even if we're crying, we're trying to jump up and down and just try to keep distracted because it's really hard. We know a lot of these people. We grew up with these people. We know the kids, the teachers that we went to school with, police officers that we know that we grew up with, that I went to school with, and it's hard because it's just hard.
It is hard.
It's hard.
Senora Lopez, and Senora Lopez feels comfortable in Spanish, so I'm going to ask her a question in Spanish, pero me estabas diciendo que estabas llorando. Duele mucho, and I'm telling her it hurts a lot.
Me dolió mucho a mí que ese niño hiciera tanto daño a otros niños inocentes. ¿Por qué la mamá no lo cuidó? ¿Por qué la mamá no lo educó? ¿Por qué la mamá no estuvo ahí? ¿Qué pasó? ¿Dónde está esa mamá que tuvo ese niño? No tenía atenciones en su casa seguramente y su mente se fue a lo malo. Yo quisiera una respuesta de eso.
She was just saying person just caused so much, and she just wishes that, you know, she was saying for the parents, she wished that they would have paid more attention, and she was just saying it's kind of hard to imagine. It's hard to think. Sus vecinos.
Los vecinos, todos estamos caídos por eso. Todo el mundo está caído. Nunca de que yo vivo aquí había mirado algo tan fuerte como ahora. Es demasiado. Yo estuve 3 días en la cama, no me podía parar.
No.
De pura tristeza.
That is true.
Como pude me levanté. Me dijo mi otra hija, mami, váyase para San Antonio, mami. No voy a estar sola.
Y no está sola. No está sola, Señora Lopez. She's just saying she, like Kelly was saying, she hasn't got out of bed in 3 days. I mean, you feel and you sense the pain. You all grew up with these families. I mean, this is, I think for a lot of people, it hurts.
It does hurt. I mean, we just went by Raw because we were gonna pay our respects, but I mean the line was long, and as we sat in the parking lot, we were crying, and we said a prayer in the car because we couldn't, you know, get off. But my mom was telling me, remember you used to play in this school, in the playground, and I said, yeah, I remember it, and I said to her, I still have a picture where I'm wearing a Robb Elementary School shirt, and it was green with white linings here, and it was me, her, and my other sister. And she said those were the good times when there was no cell phone, there was no internet, and everything was just good back in those days. And I said, yeah, I remember those times. I remember playing with my friend here and here.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, just wonder what's going to happen to this school. What's going to happen, you know?
And I think that's a good point to bring up, because for me is, you know, for when I talk to people, it's like, how do you move forward? You know, how does life move forward, especially for you all as a town? Where do you think we go from here? Because so much is still, you know, that it has to be questioned in terms of the investigation and all these things. But how do you think that the town moves forward?
Just praying and being just day by day. Pray, be there for one another. Call your friends, call your neighbors, check up on them. Even the ones that say are not lonely or don't feel lonely, they're lonely. They are. Everyone's feeling it. Everyone is. Just check up on them and continue in prayers. And that's all I can say for the families. I feel for each and every one of those faces
that you're wearing right here.
Each and every one of these faces that I look at, their children, their mothers that I know, people that I went to school with, their wives, and girls that I know, those are her kids. I pray for them because I know they're going through a hard time right now. I pray for every single one of them. I also pray for the shooters' families as well, because I wish things were different. I wish the mother would have been more attentive, the father, and the police also as well, because I wish they would have acted quickly. Like there was no time to be waiting, but you know.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. Señora, gracias por su tiempo. Thank you for your time. Cuídese. Take care of yourself. Thank you, guys. Gracias. And you heard it right there. I mean, that is the sentiment from someone who continues to call this home and has for more than 50 years, Phil and Alicia.
Yeah, just heartbreaking, Henry. We appreciate you bringing us that interview, which is so hard to hear, and you can hear the crack in her voice that we've all really had throughout the week.
I mean, this community and so many of us in South Texas are just hurting. You know, this unspeakable violence that happened affects all of us. And we spoke with the Children's Bereavement Center of South Texas earlier this week, and they said everyone, grieves in a different way. And this grief will be long lasting. So one of the things that they're doing, they're teaming up with the Bexar County District Attorney, the San Antonio Area Foundation, and they're raising money. It's in 2 separate funds. One is the Uvalde Strong Fund. This will go toward all of the families who have been affected by this. And then the Uvalde Strong Survivors Fund. That fund can help other community members, just like those 2 women who Henry was speaking to, who need someone to talk to, who need the counseling, who will need the mental health resources for days, months, and even years to come. So you have these groups that will need this support. And I've seen tweets about this, right? That people are worried that we will just leave after certain days. You know, like this support is needed for so many months to come. So I did want to mention those resources.
Yeah, those resources definitely needed now, but they're going to be needed for a long time, not just this week or next week. Those resources are going to be needed for a very long time. Let's do this. Let's go back out to downtown Uvalde and go back to Henry Ramos. I know he's standing by live right now with State Senator Roland Gutierrez. Henry, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Phil. You said it exactly right, the senator joining me now, and I think what both of us were just saying, Senator, I mean, it's kind of even hard to think, honestly. You know, it's been a long few days. I mean, just kind of give me where you're at right now.
You know, Henry, it's been really emotionally draining. You're just on a roller coaster. But I don't even think about myself when I see the families. I made it a point to give them a little bit of space for a few days. The last 48 hours I've been meeting more of them, and I'll continue doing that. I want to assure them that they have the adequate state resources, make sure that we find more resources for them. No one should feel like they're in need for anything. I want them to know that we're here for them and we're in here for the long haul. I've asked Greg Abbott to give us $2 million for this community, the community health clinic, so that we can bring long-term mental health care. There is only one psychiatrist in Uvalde. That is the problem of rural Texas. We need licensed social workers here rather than doing teletherapy, which is incredibly difficult. Therapy is a little bit different than telemedicine. You really need to have that personal touch. And so this is just the beginning. Our families here that are affected are on a roller coaster ride of their own, 1,000 times what you and I are going through.
Sure.
But I'm not going to leave, and we're going to make sure that we keep doing what we need to do for our constituents.
And with that, I mean, you've been pretty vocal. You want the governor to call a special session, correct?
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about that, and will that happen? Are we realistic that that could happen?
Well, listen, I'm going to keep yelling. I'm going to keep demanding it. People are demanding change, Democrats and Republicans. How is it that an 18-year-old can walk into a store down the street, buy 2 automatic rifles in 3 different days, 1,800 rounds of ammunition, and no one stops to say anything? It needs to be raised to 21. We need to have waiting periods. We need to have red flag laws. There's about 3 things that most of people agree on. And so therefore, if most Democrats and Republicans agree on them, then why aren't we doing them? And it only comes down to one thing, and that's the NRA, gun manufacturers, and their money that they're giving to the Republican Party. If Greg Abbott wants to go lobby for them, if he wants to be an advocate for them, that's on him. But the people of Texas are sick and tired of this. He's had 8 massacres under his watch. Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. Is there, you think with this, I mean, you were saying Republicans and Democrats, is there bipartisan support for this?
There's bipartisan support in the constituency, in the voters. It's the folks in Austin, the Republicans in Austin, that don't want to move a bit because they'd rather advocate for the NRA than advocate for their constituents that want common sense gun laws. Look, I'm a gun owner, but this is ridiculous. These weapons in the hands of 18-year-olds makes 0 sense, and we have to create some change there. I've had 2 Republicans, one in the House, one in the Senate, already call for a special session. That has never happened before. You've got colleagues that are calling me. They're anonymous at this point. They don't want me to say who they are, but they're telling me, well, maybe the 21 thing makes sense. Well, of course it makes sense. Of course it makes sense. We've got work to do. Greg Abbott wants to blow us off. He wants to blow us off. We need to go back in 2-3 weeks, uncover what went on over here, and make sure that we have adequate and substantial change on our gun laws. Well, let's create gun laws because we have none. Every time we go back in that building every other year, all they do is create more accessibility to guns instead of less.
I do want to ask you really quickly, Senator, if I can, just about the accountability aspect in terms of the response of police. I mean, you had the DPS commissioner saying it was a mistake. Who should be held accountable here?
Everyone. Greg Abbott should be held accountable. The police should be held accountable, but not just the low-level police officer at the school district. Every one of them. There was 4 different agencies that waited. At what point does the next agency with higher firepower not take operational control? I talked to Colonel McGraw yesterday. He cried to me on the phone. I cried to him. This is devastating for us all. I get it. But people made mistakes, and to point the finger at the school district police and say they're the ones that messed up, no, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that.
Senator, I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you so much. And I know that you're going to continue to meet with the families. And obviously, as we've seen, the outpouring love and support will continue here. And of course, a lot of eyes on you as well. And, you know, on the politicians, because I think people clearly want action. Hopefully that. Thank you for your time. Phil and Alicia, back to you.
Okay, Henry, thank you so much for that live interview with State Senator Roland Gutierrez. His constituency expands all the way out there to Uvalde, so our condolences continue for his constituents and everybody impacted. In case you're just joining us, what you see in the upper right side of your screen is a live look at Garner Field in Uvalde, Texas, where President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Joe Biden are currently meeting with first responders. Let's give you kind of a recap of what the day has been like. So earlier this morning, the president and the first lady left Delaware, headed to San Antonio. And from San Antonio, they went to Uvalde, arrived at Garner Field. This is a look at the president and first lady getting off of Marine One. When they got off of Marine One, they were greeted by Governor Greg Abbott. The first lady of Texas was also there. We know the mayor of Uvalde was also there, Don McLaughlin. Congressman Tony Gonzalez was there. He was the one wearing that lighter blue jacket. State Senator Roland Gutierrez, who you just heard from, was there. He's the second person on the left there. So the president and first lady were greeted by elected officials here in Texas as they arrived around 11 o'clock this morning in Uvalde at Garner Field. It's been a jam-packed day for the president, you know, and think about it. It's been a terrible month for Americans. It was Saturday, May 14th, when there was a shooting in Buffalo that killed 10 people. That following Tuesday on May 17th, the president flew to Buffalo to not just be commander-in-chief, but consoler-in-chief, as we often say. Then this last Tuesday, we all know what happened. This terrible shooting that left 21 people dead in Uvalde. And here we are today, May 29th. The president is now here in Uvalde to console and to grieve with this small community. So earlier, the president left. Here is a shot of him and the first lady arriving at Robb Elementary to pay their respects. As you can see, they had a bouquet of flowers with them. And that's the school memorial. As they arrived at Robb Elementary, they were greeted with some cheers. You could hear the cheers in the background. And they placed the flowers there at that growing memorial that's only gotten bigger by the hour over the last few days. You can only wonder what was also going through the mind of Dr. Joe Biden, who has dedicated her life to public education. And never do teachers expect to find themselves in a situation where they have to shield and protect their kids from a gunman. You can see that memorial there. Alicia, you've been down there. You've seen how much that has grown.
So you have two different memorials, Phil, right now in Uvalde. You have this one that you see the president and first lady paying a visit to. It's my understanding that Dr. Biden touched each picture because you have a picture in front of each cross that represents each of the 19 children, each of the 2 teachers, and that memorial is a little more somber, I would say. You know, obviously, both are very, very moving and really bring so many people to tears. But the one that is in downtown Uvalde, that is where you hear the music. That's where you hear the prayers, because we see people from all over the United States that are coming to pay their respects. For example, we saw a couple yesterday from Chicago go to downtown Uvalde to pay their respects. And you have other families who are impacted by gun violence who are making sure that they are paying their respects to these children who lost their lives.
Yeah, people flowing in from all over the world, really. So that was at 11:30 when the president and first lady arrived to Robb Elementary. Now, this was around noon. This was a noon mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church there in Uvalde. You can see the president walk up to the front. These are some of the images that we've got. I understand that children, as you can see, were called up to the front. The mass was led by Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Sierra. You can see the president there talking with a few people. I understand that the Archbishop said at the beginning of Mass that our hearts are broken. After about an hour or so from Mass, the president left Sacred Heart Catholic Church, and then he went to go meet with survivors as well as families of the victims, and that was around 1:30. Of course, as you see those images from inside Sacred Heart Catholic Church, we know Joe Biden is a Catholic. He's been open about his faith. He leans on his faith during these tragic times, and he often shares, when grieving with families, his personal moments of tragedy. We know he lost his young daughter to a tragic car accident, as well as his first wife, and then his son, Beau Biden, died from cancer. So he often shares those stories with people because he can't put himself in the shoes of the families down in Uvalde, but he can certainly relate to them as far as losing somebody that you just love so deeply. So after the president left the church, again, he went to go meet with survivors as well as victims' families. And then that's wrapped up around 5 o'clock. And now what you see on the upper right side of your screen is Garner Airfield, where where the president and First Lady are now meeting with first responders. I believe Troy Kless is there now.
Someone hung a banner like on
Troy, what can you tell us now? Has there been any more movement since we last checked in with you?
Heard that. Yeah, Phil, thank you. We are still watching by as President Biden has been visiting with first responders for roughly the last, I want to say, 30 plus minutes here that he's been back at Garner Field where part of this day started. And, you know, obviously the first responders having to deal with this tragedy as well, and whatever they saw when responding to this as well. You know, the first responders, specifically the police and the Consolidated Independent School District Police, you know, they faced criticism in wake of the shooting, but regardless, they have to experience, you know, they went through that experience, you know, firsthand and saw what happened at Robb Elementary School. So I'm sure, you know, with President Biden visiting, and you know, we mentioned that I'm sure that he's going to be providing support to them as well as he's been providing support to the entire Uvalde community today. Again, going from here back to visiting with the victims' families and the survivors, going to the elementary school, and being here in Uvalde, a moment that a lot of people are not going to forget, but for many of the wrong reasons, that a tragedy had to happen here for the president to come visit this small, close-knit town who is still reeling from everything that's going on right now. So as we can see, the motorcade is still at a standstill right now. I think we see a few less people that are standing outside of the hangar down there than we did earlier when he first arrived. So, but regardless, there's still a pretty large crowd here along the street here. I could see a little bit further down to our left-hand side, not in the shot, but we could see there was people standing by the fence. A banner was hung on the fence as well, and we could see signs earlier today thanking the president for him being here in Uvalde. Now, we didn't get that reception from everyone, but I think that, again, many people that we've been talking with say that they're appreciative. And one thing that stuck with me when I spoke with a grandfather who his granddaughter was actually in the school but had left 15 minutes prior to the shooting. He said to me that, while he is the president, yes, he is a human too. And Phil, you mentioned the grief that he's experienced firsthand, but also grieving alongside the families involved in this tragedy, something that he's going to be dealing with today. So we'll send it back to y'all, and we'll keep our eyes out as the motorcade remains here at Garner Field.
All right, Troy, thank you very much. The president will be visiting with first responders for about 20 more minutes before he flies back to San Antonio to Kelly Field. And that's where we find KENS 5, Sarah Duran. She is there right in front of Air Force One. Sarah, what can you tell us?
Alicia and Phil, I can tell you right now that we are dealing with some heavy winds here at Kelly Field. Very windy out here, but nonetheless, we are out here to cover the president's departure later this evening. Now, right now, we are along the tarmac at Kelly Field. This is on the southwest side of San Antonio. Right behind me, like you said, is Air Force One. That is a Boeing 757 airplane parked here waiting for the president and the first lady. Now, like y'all have been saying, the president and the first lady, they're still in Uvalde at this time. We have been told the Bidens are expected to depart and arrive here about 6:45. However, I have been told they are ahead of schedule at this time, so we'll see what time they end up here. As for now, we would like to recap their day here today in Uvalde. The Bidens arrived in Uvalde just before 11 o'clock this morning. They were greeted by Governor Greg Abbott, First Lady Cecilia Abbott, Congressman Tony Gonzalez, Uvalde County Judge Bill Mitchell, and Uvalde Mayor Don McLaughlin. Now, their first stop was at Robb Elementary School, the site of the mass shooting. We are told the Bidens arrived to cheers, but the visit was rather somber, as you can imagine. The Bidens placed flowers at the 21 crosses there at the school. If you don't know by now, each cross bears the name of each of those victims. Now, before departing, the president visited with the district's superintendent and the school's principal. We are also told Governor Greg Abbott also made an appearance at the school to join them. In our notes that I read earlier this afternoon, we are told a man in the crowd specifically shouted at Governor Greg Abbott, "We need help." And this is really in line with the people I have spoken to during my visits to Uvalde. Many were very emotional this week, as you can understand. They were very upset yesterday over what happened to these children on Tuesday. I visited with a woman named Gina Gonzalez. If you were tuning into our newscast last night, you may have seen her there. Gina Gonzalez is a stepmom of Annabelle Guadalupe Rodriguez. Now, the 10-year-old died in the mass shooting on Tuesday, and Gonzalez told me she was upset over the president's visit. She told me over and over again in our interview, "It's too late. It's too late. She's gone." She described Annabelle as a happy and loving third grader at Robb Elementary. Speaking on victims, I also want to share something that happened to me personally this morning. Another victim, Ellie Garcia. She was a third grader at Robb Elementary School. I learned this morning that Ellie Garcia was supposed to attend church in Uvalde this morning. My pastor told me she was supposed to read a passage from the book of Deuteronomy to her church, her home church in Uvalde. Unfortunately, that would never happen. So in her place, a little girl here from San Antonio read the passage in her memory. It was a very touching moment in church this morning. I can tell you that everybody was silent after that little girl read that passage, but it was a beautiful moment, and I wanted to share that with you. I like to imagine Ellie is in a better place this afternoon. Now, speaking of church, I want to talk about the Bidens' visit to Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Uvalde. Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Sierra here from San Antonio welcomed them, the Bidens, on arrival. The Bidens walked inside the church just after 12 o'clock, we're told. Now, the First Lady reached out and lightly touched the hands of several people inside that church in Uvalde. as they made their way to their seats in the first row, her and the president. The Archbishop began his homily with, quote, "Our hearts are broken." I think that perfectly sums up this week in Uvalde. 20 minutes into the service, as reported, children were invited to the front. The Archbishop said the community, or rather the children of Uvalde would help the community heal. These little innocent children will help. Adding, God prepared a place for the 19 little ones we lost earlier this week. Now, in a plea to the community, the Archbishop also said we must, quote, "resolve to support one another with respect for our differences." Since Tuesday, we have heard so many different things about what's happened on Tuesday, and it's easier to anger than it is to accept. And I think that's what he meant by that part of his homily. Now, the church service ended just before 1:30, we're told, and as the Bidens walked out of the church, someone in the crowd once again yelled towards them. They said, "Do something," and President Biden said, "We will." Now, that is the latest update we have from our crews on the ground there in Uvalde. I've been listening to our coverage so far. It seems like the Bidens are meeting with first responders as we speak. Like we said, we do expect them to arrive here at Kelly Field sometime around 6:45 this evening, but people here on the ground, the Secret Service members tell me that could be earlier. I'm not too sure at this time. We'll keep you updated. But like I said, right now, the Bidens are visiting with survivors and victims' families in Uvalde. As we get more information on what's happening with this visit, we will be sure to bring it to you on air and online on KENS5.com. Alicia, Phil?
Okay, Sarah, thank you. Definitely not the Sunday that everyone anticipated a week ago. We know President Biden talks about his faith and being Catholic. He goes to Mass on a regular basis, but never in a million years would he have thought last Sunday that he would be attending Mass this Sunday in Uvalde, Texas. Grieving with many families. Right, and earlier today we had a conversation with Congressman Joaquin Castro. Yeah, I got to talk to the congressman. Congressman Joaquin Castro was in Uvalde yesterday. He got to meet with some of the victims' families. You can only imagine how difficult that is. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Yeah, I had a chance to meet with a few of the family members and community members, and I expressed that San Antonians and people around the nation are grieving with them and mourning with them, and also pledged that I would do everything that I could to help make change and make it so that other American communities don't have to suffer through the same fate that they're going through now. And, you know, these people are going through just unimaginable pain and grief. And you know, they asked for a few things. They demanded change on gun reform and gun safety laws. People kept asking me, how is it that an 18-year-old can go into a store and buy an AR-15, but he can't even go in and buy beer or cigarettes? They're also concerned about their other little kids who are in elementary school, and they don't want those kids to have to go back to Robb Elementary next year. And so I'm going to be pushing the president and the governor to work together to make sure that they're able to build them a new school. I know that State Senator Roland Gutierrez is working hard on this as well, so that those kids who did survive and their relatives don't have to go back to Robb Elementary. And then they want answers to what happened there. You know, it took law enforcement, by some accounts, over an hour to actually go into that classroom and take out the shooter. And they keep wondering, why did it happen to our kids? Why did it happen in Uvalde? Because we've seen scenarios like this before, and this is unprecedented. It's just never happened like this before.
Well, some people were very vocal and had a clear message when the president arrived. That's what Sarah and Troy have been mentioning. And a group of protesters once again chanted, "Do something." President Biden then shouts back, "We will," before getting into his SUV. Yeah, I want to go back, though, to that interview with Congressman Joaquin Castro. A lot to unpack there, but, you know, I think one thing that really stuck out to me, because there's just been so many moving pieces since this all unfolded, was they want a new school. You can't blame the kids for not wanting to go back to Robb Elementary. In fact, you couldn't blame a child if they didn't want to go back to school at all, considering what had happened. So I asked him again later in that interview, I mean, what are the chances that actually happens? And surely it has to happen, and he's going to press on that. You heard
He's going to press the governor, and he said State Senator Roland Gutierrez will be working on him. You know, this is all so reminiscent of 2017 after that tragedy in Sutherland Springs. We know they destroyed the church and built a new church, and you can only imagine that's the obvious answer, what you have to do, because it's just too painful to walk back into a building like that. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do as far as getting a new school up in such a short amount of time, because we're talking about a matter of months. And again, back in 2017, I was down there in Sutherland Springs when then Vice President Mike Pence came to visit this small rural community in Texas that probably nobody outside of Texas had ever heard about. And here we are, 2022, and now you have President Joe Biden in a small rural Texas town that probably no one outside of Texas has ever heard of before, and we're doing this again.
And this all happens at what's supposed to be such a joyful time for these students, for these teachers. The morning of the shooting, many of these students who died were given awards for perfect attendance, for outstanding leadership, things like that. The day before that, in a tradition for the school district, you had many of the high school seniors walk through the hallways of Robb Elementary School giving high fives to these children, you know, as a tradition, so these children can see, you know what, I'm going to grow up and be just like that one day. I'm going to graduate and do this one day. Yeah. So it's just, it's canceled all of the activities, obviously, for Robb Elementary School. Graduation plans have yet to be announced as well.
Just heartbreaking to think that these kids were just days away from summer vacation. And now, instead of planning summer camps, parents are planning funerals. And we know that some of the first funerals will start just on Tuesday. And that, of course, will just open up wounds again. And it's going to be a long road to recovery. Let's do this. Let's go back live to reporter Henry Ramos. He, again, is in downtown Uvalde. Henry, what's it like out there right now?
Yeah, Phil, I mean, just kind of piggybacking of what you were just saying about a long road to recovery. I mean, that's really, I think that, you know, as we progress through the days and speaking with people, it just doesn't get any easier. You know, we always hear this saying that time heals, you know, all wounds, and it just takes time for it to get better. But, you know, and doing stories like this of tragedy, speaking with families when they lose a loved one, I mean, it doesn't really, you know, is what they say. I mean, days could go by, months could go by, years could go by, that will never get better because their loved one will never come back. They don't have them, and so it is tough. And then, you know, as we just approach that, we were about to have funerals, you know, that does bring up those wounds. But right behind me, I mean, we've just hearing music right now. People are starting to sing, and people are starting to pray. As you can see, people are bringing their flowers, balloons, writing their messages, things like that. So, but again, really quickly, if we can, if you want to, sorry, go ahead and come with me. I'm so sorry. I know this is live television, and so this is how it works. Remind me of your name, please.
Joanna Garcia.
Joanna Garcia. And, you know, right when we first went on the air, I showed you all the shirts you're from San Antonio, the Garcia and the Munoz family, correct? Tell me a little bit about this.
So yesterday we decided, my mom and my family, that we wanted to come pay our respects. And I have a small business. I make shirts at my house for a living. So I make shirts for us to wear here. And then my mom was like, well, what if I buy you shirts and we donate them tomorrow? And I said, well, fine. For every shirt that you buy, I'll donate the image, the material, the ink to put, you know, to bring it over here. I had seen this image online and I liked it, so I put it on here. And then, you know, I posted it on my Facebook. Friends and family started donating, so we ended up with like over 150 shirts that we brought to donate, just to give away.
Mm-hmm. And how many have you given out?
I think we're down to like the last 20, but they gave me like an address. I don't know any of the people who were, you know, involved in everything, but they gave me a couple of addresses of families because I wanted to give them shirts too. So, yeah.
I probably know the answer to this question, but I want to hear it from you. Mm-hmm. Okay, why? I mean, why did you feel so moved to do this?
I have a 10-year-old at home. When it's so close, I mean, to even think of what they went through, the fear, you know, the whole time that they were, the ones that did survive, that were laying there, to imagine what they went through, it's not for a child to, it's not for anybody to go through, more or less a child. So I just wanted to do something, and, you know, making shirts, which is what I do, is how I found the way to do it.
And I think for me, I'm curious, and I actually haven't talked to parents. I know, you know, Phil, who's our anchor, he's a father. But I mean, just one last question here: what kind of conversation do you have with your 10-year-old?
They've changed in the last days a lot. Before it used to be, you know, the typical stranger danger kind of, but now it's like, if something were to happen like this, God forbid, if it does, you know, this is what you do, A, B, and C.
Right. Sorry, I'm being told. Phil and Elisa, I'm sorry, we'll have to send it back to you guys.
Okay, Henry, thank you. And we thank Joanna Garcia from San Antonio for sharing that with us. If you're joining us just now, you're taking a live look at Garner Field in Uvalde, Texas. The president and the first lady are getting ready to leave Uvalde after a jam-packed day. They arrived there around 11 o'clock this morning. They went straight to the school, Robb Elementary, and paid their respects at the school. You can only imagine the emotion that was going through them when they saw that growing memorial there at the school. And then around noon today, the president and first lady attended Mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church. And around 1:30, they met with families of the victims as well as survivors for about three and a half hours. And then they just wrapped up meeting with first responders. So this is Dr. Jill Biden and President Joe Biden now getting on to Marine One. They will leave here in just a matter of minutes, and then they will fly from Uvalde back here to San Antonio, arrive at Kelly Field, and we will go back out live to Kelly Field in just a bit. We've got reporter Sarah Duran standing by, and then they will leave Kelly Field in San Antonio around 6:45 before departing back to Delaware.
And in meeting with these first responders, they talked with them for about an hour. You had multiple agencies responding to this scene. You had Uvalde CISD Police, Border Patrol, Texas Rangers, afterwards DPS, and you can imagine the scene that they arrived to, and as soon as they opened the door to the classroom and confronted the gunman, the feelings there, as many of those officers had children at Robb Elementary School. So you had that response obviously at the school. And then as that was happening throughout the day, you had emergency crews from across South Texas go to Uvalde and stand by for help. For example, right down the street on Main Street in Uvalde from the Civic Center, where parents were instructed to pick up their children on the day of the shooting, you had a staging area for law enforcement vehicles. You had ambulances, for example, for first responders from Bandera County, from Valverde, from areas around Uvalde that were just ready for the call in case first responders on the scene needed their help in any sort of way. And so you have these conversations that are much needed, and this is another entity that will, I'm sure, be grieving for a very, very long time.
Yeah, mixed emotions, a lot of grief also, though, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration as well, understandably so. And of course, we do now know as of today that the DOJ will be conducting a review of how the situation was handled by law enforcement there on the scene. That will be made public, and then of course we'll see what happens from there. A lot of people asking for accountability, but first we'll see what the DOJ says, how everything was handled. But again, you're taking a live look at Garner Field in Uvalde, Marine One, with President Joe Biden and the First Lady, Dr. Joe Biden, getting ready to take off from Uvalde and head back here to San Antonio. They'll arrive at Kelly Field around 6:45 before leaving San Antonio and headed back to Delaware.
So yesterday, President Biden was at his alma mater. He was at the University of Delaware, and he delivered a commencement address. And in his speech, you know, he was addressing these mass shootings, like you mentioned earlier, the shooting at the Buffalo supermarket and then the shooting in Uvalde. And he told graduates yesterday, he said, in the face of such destructive forces, we have to stand stronger. He said we cannot outlaw tragedy, but we can make America safer. And in his closing remarks, he said no generation gets to choose what world they graduate into, but a few generations enter at a point in history where they have the power to change the trajectory of a nation. And you can. And so you mentioned also earlier how he related to these parents as he was visiting with them for hours, how he has also lost a child, you know, so I think
two children.
Pardon me, yes, 2 children. And so I'm curious to see how these families responded, because our reporters who are on scene, they say that he's getting mixed reactions. So curious to see how these families feel after a visit from the President of the United States. I mean, I know this community is exhausted. We heard from people who were not directly affected, as in they didn't have a family member who perished in this, but how they are hurting and how they couldn't get out of bed for days and they couldn't eat for days. We interviewed a teacher who was a father of a teacher, 4th grade teacher, who was 3 doors down from the classroom where all of these students and their 2 teachers were killed. And he said, my family, we just can't sleep. It's almost like we feel a sense of guilt. We can't wake up without thinking, was this all a nightmare? Did this all really happen? And you have some teachers who are considering a career change if protection isn't provided in a different way for these classrooms, for these schools. So these conversations are just starting to emerge about what do we do from here. And Henry asked Senator Roland Gutierrez, what can we do from here? And he said we hopefully can make change starting in Austin.
Yeah, and you can understand at the same time the frustration and the skepticism that a lot of Americans have, because keep in mind, it was 10 years ago, 2012, when Sandy Hook Elementary had that massacre at their school that killed 20 kids, 6 teachers. And that was when Joe Biden was vice president. Fast forward 10 years, and here we are, and he's playing the role of consoler in chief, and now he's having to deal with another mass shooting inside an elementary school. The last place you would think something like that would happen.
And he isn't the first, should I say, not celebrity, but big name to visit Uvalde. You have people from all over Texas, all over the nation going to pay their respects. We saw Meghan Markle this week. Matthew McConaughey is from Uvalde. He was there shortly after the shooting, just a couple of days after. So this is something that has really, really touched our nation, to see the faces of these children and their plans for the future and their families who just, it's so devastating. Some had to identify their child through a DNA sample. This is still raw for many of these families. Just days have passed since this has happened. So we look forward to see what can be done from here. We have optimism, we have skepticism. So we'll see what difference maybe this visit can make. I know a lot of people, like we mentioned earlier, they're trying to see what can happen with Robb Elementary School.
Yeah, and you're taking a live look at Marine One leaving Garner Field in Uvalde, Texas, carrying the president as well as First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. They are now headed back here to San Antonio and will arrive at Kelly Field around 6:45. We will go back out to Kelly Field live. That's where our reporter Sarah Duran is standing by. She's waiting for the president to arrive, and then he'll jump on to Air Force One before heading out to Delaware.
Set to arrive in Delaware around 11 o'clock tonight.
What?
And this has just been a full day, and Sarah Duran, I believe, joins us now live from Kelly Field. Sarah.
Hey there, Alicia and Phil. Again, still dealing with those heavy winds, so it's really hard to hear you right now. But like you said, we are along the tarmac here at Kelly Field. You can see Air Force One right behind me. This is a Boeing 757 parked here waiting for the president. And Movement here right now. I'm going to check to my right-hand side. We have some soldiers set up on some risers over here, but that's the most that's happened within the last few minutes. But from what I'm hearing through my IFB, I am hearing that the president and the first lady are on their way back here to San Antonio. They have been in Uvalde all day today, like we have been reporting. So far, we have recapped their visit up until the church service. And I believe at some point we'll be showing you what it looks like in Uvalde here today. Lots of memorials growing in the small Texas city. Now, the Bidens attended noon mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Uvalde. Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Sierra presided over that service, giving a homily over the tragedy that occurred earlier this week in Uvalde. We don't have much details on what the Bidens did after church service, but we do know they recently visited with survivors and victim families. We know that they visited with survivors and victim families. You'll have to forgive me. We got a lot of heavy wind here right now, but they visited with those families. Now, we do want to recap. A total of 19 children and 2 teachers died at Robb Elementary School earlier this week. It's been an incredibly tough time for this small Texas community, and we have been there every step of the way ever since this was first reported on Tuesday. From the children who lost their lives to the parents that now have to bury these children, this community has a lot to deal with, especially with those long-term effects. And of course, the numerous first responders who have been on scene since Tuesday. We know that the Bidens just visited with them not too long ago at the Air Force field there in Uvalde not too long ago. But we do know that they are on their way here back to San Antonio. This is where they first arrived here earlier this morning. They are arriving, we are told, by Marine One. We'll know, we're keeping our eyes to the sky, but we will know when they do arrive because that particular helicopter has the official seal on the side. That is the one that's carrying the Bidens. But we'll be bringing you that live coverage here on KENS 5 from Kelly Field here in San Antonio. Back to you.
Okay, Sarah, thank you. Sarah will stand by there at Kelly Field here in San Antonio as we await the arrival of President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. It should only be about 35 minutes or so. It's a quick flight from Uvalde here to San Antonio via Marine One, and then they'll jump on to Air Force One. On the top right-hand side of your screen, you can see a live look of downtown Uvalde. This is where one of the many memorials, really, at this point, that continues to grow, and we continue to see visitors come in from outside of Texas, in fact, all over the world, really.
That's right. And in the middle of that downtown plaza that you see on your screen, there is a water fountain. And circling that water fountain, you have 21 crosses. Each cross has the name of a victim, all 19 children and their 2 teachers. And surrounding each cross, you are seeing teddy bears, flowers, balloons. At night, I mean, it's really, it's so moving because we are seeing candles. So when it's dark out, the candles illuminate this memorial, and so this has really been a popular space for people to go and pay their respects. We saw the family of, for example, one of the teachers, Eva Mireles. We saw her family there. Other teachers at Robb Elementary School just stopping by, sitting down, and having a moment. You know, we obviously see a lot of emotions there. We have seen people of all ages just shed a tear. I mean, because it's just so unbelievable what has happened here in Uvalde, a town of 15,000, maybe a little more than 15,000. So that is certainly one, I would say, the 2 big ones, right? Yeah. The one downtown and then the one at Robb Elementary are the biggest memorials.
A lot of memorials, typically a Sunday afternoon in Uvalde would be quiet, and you talked about how it's a town of maybe 15, 16,000 people, but over the last week it's ballooned, but not under any good circumstances, because now you have all these visitors coming to pay their respects, as well as media from all over the state of Texas, all over the nation, and even outside of the United States. And then you've got all this law enforcement from different agencies that have ascended upon the small town to help provide resources, because the city or town of Uvalde is not equipped to handle these types of situations. We did just get a statement from the Uvalde Mayor, Don McLaughlin. I want to read that to you as you continue to take a live look at the scene there in downtown Uvalde. The mayor of Uvalde issued this statement. Uvalde is suffering unimaginable pain as we prepare to bury the innocent victims of Tuesday's senseless murders at Robb Elementary School. My focus is helping parents who lost children, children who lost parents, and young survivors navigate through this horrific nightmare. I thank the U.S. Department of Justice for accepting my request to conduct an independent critical incident review of law enforcement's response to the mass shooting. I trust the assessment will be fair, transparent, and independent. Please pray for Uvalde for the strength to live through the grief, the pain, and the healing process. Again, that's a direct quote from Uvalde Mayor Don McLaughlin. We did see him briefly earlier today when President Joe Biden arrived there in Uvalde. He was there with Governor Greg Abbott, as well as some other elected officials like Congressman Tony Gonzalez, State Senator Roland Gutierrez, and some others. So that being the big development, that the mayor did ask the Department of Justice to conduct a review on what exactly happened, specifically law enforcement's response to what happened inside the school. And of course, we'll get that review at some point. The Department of Justice will publish its findings.
And our reporter Matt Houston is working on that report for tonight on KENS 5 at 10. I want to give you a live look now at Air Force One. This is at Kelly Field, and it is set to take off back to Newcastle, Delaware at about 6:45. This will conclude President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden's visit to Uvalde. They got here at about 11 o'clock this morning, and they have been visiting with victims' families. They were visiting with first responders. So in about a little more than half an hour, we will bring this to you live when Air Force One takes off from Kelly Field here in San Antonio.
Let me give this update too, because obviously people are grieving those lives lost, but we can't forget that there are people, survivors, still in the hospital. We have gotten a couple of updates. One from BAMC, where 2 adult patients are still in that hospital. We've been told they are both in fair condition. And then at University Hospital, 3 patients remain there. A 66-year-old woman is in fair condition. That would be an improvement over the last update that we got. There's also a 10-year-old girl in serious condition, as well as a 9-year-old girl in good condition. So again, we still have 5 patients here in San Antonio at BAMC and University Hospital that are still trying to recover, have not been released from the hospital, but at least we know the latest on their condition as people continue to pray for them as well.
And the students outside or who didn't get sent to the hospital, who, for example, like one of the 4th graders, he hid under a table and he hid behind the tablecloth. Our Henry Ramos had that report on Wednesday. You see other reports of children playing dead, you know, and these stories of the survivors, not just the children, but the adults as well. Those have been something. It's all eyes are on these survivors, hoping that they can pull through. And you know, it's just been such an incredibly difficult time for these parents who are waiting to see if their child is okay.
Yeah, the town is suffering. The town will continue to suffer well beyond this week. We do know visitations will be starting. I think you said, Alicia, right, Monday?
Yes.
We'll start to see some visitations. Unfortunately, that so many people were killed that the visitations and funerals will be on the same day in some cases.
And a lot of the funeral homes are providing these services free of charge. You have donations coming in to cover this cost, to ease that part of the burden on these families. So visitations, like you said, begin tomorrow. On Memorial Day, you have Mary Jo Garza and Maite Rodriguez. They will have Tuesday, they will have Monday visitations for them. Then Tuesday visitations, they will be for Irma Garcia. She was one of the teachers who died. And then Nevea, Alyssa Bravo, and Jose Flores, their visitations will begin on Tuesday. And we have a list for all 21 people. The details for their visitations, the Rosary funeral services are all on KENS5.com.
Yeah, a lot of resources pouring in. Of course, the community very supportive of all that money that's been donated, because that's the last thing one of these parents wants to have to worry about is, how am I going to afford to bury my child? We know Uvalde is not a very wealthy community, but at the same time, even with all those donations, unfortunately, there's no amount of money that will ease the pain, because at the end of the day, it doesn't bring back your child or your loved one like the two teachers that were also tragically killed.
So you have these donations, and then you have other acts of kindness. For example, SAISD, they provided free snack kits and free lunches for the families of Uvalde Consolidated School District. You have people who have visited that memorial outside of the downtown plaza in Uvalde giving free hugs. You have the pillows, handmade gifts as well. These little acts of kindness, everyone's just trying to see what they can do. You had blood donations that were asked for the day after the shooting, and the San Antonio Blood and Tissue Center, I believe they told us that once they put the call out that there was a need, all appointments were booked until Saturday. They had 2-hour waits, but it's important to note that that need will still remain after this week. So donate blood if you can. It takes about 20 minutes, or sign up and make an appointment.
There's going to have to be some massive changes. In case you're just joining us, we had an interview with Congressman Joaquin Castro, and he was mentioning that these kids don't want to go back to school at Robb Elementary. They may not even want to go back to school, period. But they're going to have to find a solution. And the congressman said that he's going to be pushing both the president as well as Governor Greg Abbott to find some sort of funding so that they can build a new school for all of those students that attended Robb Elementary. You can completely understand why they would never want to step foot in that building again. And we saw in 2017 after Sutherland Springs that, for example, they destroyed the building that was their church and created a new one. And so there's going to have to be change as far as that goes. Those kids are not going to want to step foot in that building. You can't blame them.
No, students, teachers, and parents, I mean, like we mentioned earlier, that some of those teachers, unless something changes with security in Texas and across the nation, they are thinking about switching careers. So that's certainly something that we will keep an eye on. If you're just joining us, this is a live look at Kelly Field in San Antonio. President Joe Biden, First Lady Jill Biden, they are set to land in about 15 minutes. We have reporter Sarah Duran. She is there, and we will bring his arrival to you. He is currently in Marine One, flying from Uvalde, the Garner Field in Uvalde, again expected to land in just about 15 minutes. That will conclude his day in South Texas.
Yeah, and in case you weren't joining us earlier, because we've basically been with the president throughout the day. When he first arrived in San Antonio, he was greeted by Mayor Ron Nirenberg, and then the president and First Lady jumped into Marine One, and then they went to Uvalde. When they landed in Uvalde, they were greeted by Governor Greg Abbott and the First Lady of Texas, as well as other elected officials, including the mayor of Uvalde, Don McLaughlin. Congressman Tony Gonzalez was there. State Senator Roland Gutierrez was there, as well as some other officials to meet the president and First Lady. And then from the Uvalde Garner Field Airport, they went to Robb Elementary School to pay their respects outside the school, where there's that growing memorial. It was emotional. When the president and First Lady first arrived, you could hear people in the back cheering. They were happy. They appeared to be happy that the president was there in Uvalde. We've heard some mixed emotions, but at that moment, you could audibly hear people cheering when the president and First Lady arrived at the elementary school. And then after about 30 minutes or so at the elementary school, the president and First Lady went to attend a noon mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church. We know the president, of course, is Catholic. He leans on his faith. He's open about his faith. He attends Mass regularly. Never did he imagine last Sunday that he'd be attending Mass in little old Uvalde, Texas, under these circumstances. Sacred Heart Catholic Church is part of the Archdiocese of San Antonio. So Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Sierra led the Mass, and that Mass was about an hour or so. We did have some images from inside, an emotional Mass, as you can only imagine.
KENS 5's Henry Ramos joins us now live from downtown Uvalde. Henry, you've been talking with families about how for days they couldn't sleep, they couldn't eat because of everything that has happened in their community. You've been talking with lawmakers. What do you see now there, Henry?
Yeah, Alicia, I mean, it's been pretty tough. I mean, emotionally draining for this community. I mean, you know, we interviewed, I still think of just, you know, an hour ago that we interviewed Mrs. Lopez, who calls this home, you know, and has for more than 50 years. I mean, you heard her voice and the tears, and saying that she wasn't able to get out of bed for 3 days because, again, in this community, and even since day one in responding to this, everyone knows everyone or has some sort of connection to everyone. And it seems like here downtown at the plaza here, it's a lot of people that don't live here, that are from out of town, and we've seen from all over. I mean, right now you can hear music is happening right behind me. People are bringing balloons, flowers, candles. A lot of that, right, with, you know, the president who just left, President Biden and the First Lady, they were here all day. And this one memorial that's kind of like right behind me, you see this kind of like silver boxes. On the other side, it's actually a memorial for the two teachers, Garcia, Eva Mireles, and it's just for them. So you see a lot of people have been paying their respects there, and then just all around the fountain here, I mean, just so many messages, so many flowers. You know, I actually saw a woman earlier at another memorial just down the road here. There's now crosses along the street here, the main street here in Uvalde, and this woman was just sitting there with her Bible on the ground, just praying, you know, just watching the crosses, just praying. And then just right across from that, chairs, 21 chairs, right in front of a daycare. I mean, it even took me a moment just to look at it. And so there's so many different feelings. Obviously, people want action. There's also that part of it as well. I mean, I interviewed Senator Gutierrez here not long ago. This is the area that he represents and has for some time. You know, talking to him, you know, he's wanting to call for a special session, calling Governor Abbott to call for a special session. He's saying that there needs to be change. But we've realized that it seems like there hasn't been change. You know, Phil was just talking about, you know, 10 years ago as we look at Sandy Hook, and here we are. And it always seems to be, and I think this is a conversation that I keep hearing from a lot of people, it's that cycle, right? We talk about the tragedy, we report on the heartache, we speak to the families, we talk about the loss, and then inserts, right, the conversation of the accountability aspect, inserts the conversation of the political side of things. And then it just seems like it just keeps going, and we keep seeing it. But it seems though the sentiment here, and speaking with the senator, he was even saying that he's going to close down his constituent office down in Eagle Pass and actually move it here because he knows the work is far from over here. I mean, as you've been saying, Phil and Alicia, I mean, the funerals, those are about to start tomorrow. At least the visitation is starting tomorrow, and then we go through that process. And on top of that, on top of all of that grief, then we have those conversations. And even speaking to the San Antonio family here, who you heard from the mother, also in tears. She knew that she wanted to come here with her family today, the Garcia and the Munoz family from San Antonio. And she has a small business making t-shirts, and so that's what she did. 150 t-shirts in less than a day, and just handing them out, and or if people want to make a donation and she wants to give those proceeds to the family. But I think for me though, and what I was asking her, it's the conversations that as a parent that you have with your child now, because you have to think about now that this has happened, and we've been hearing about, well, what's going to happen to Robb Elementary. But even if for those students who didn't attend Robb, and I know that we're now in the summer though, right, in the summer months, But do students now feel safe going to school? And again, it's those conversations that we have, but as a parent, how do you have that conversation? And even speaking with her, she was just saying, you know, it used to be just, you know, don't talk to strangers, that kind of thing, which is still what parents obviously tell their child. But now it's like, how do you handle this situation? And I still keep just replaying in my head the fourth grader, the 9-year-old that I spoke to just a few days ago, who told me that when the gunman walked in and he says, it's time to die. You know, and the bravery and the courage that it took for this fourth grader to think on the spot. I mean, obviously we know that these is what these kids are trained, unfortunately. They know how to handle these situations. But to think on the spot, to tell his friend, we've got to hide under this table, covered with a tablecloth, and he says, don't be quiet, don't talk. And they were able to walk out. But the majority of his class wasn't. And I think that just being able just for him to go through that. And then, of course, you know, when he wanted to talk to me is because he wanted to share not only what happened, but he said it helps him to share his feelings and his emotions. But it's still just within a heavy heart within this community. I think it is that even more of a greater pain because everyone knows everyone and they have that connection. And that's what makes it tough, Phil and Alicia.
All right, Henry, thank you. And yeah, it's tough. I mean, I can tell you as a parent of 2 elementary age school age kids, you know, one of the hardest parts for me this week was picking up my kids on that Tuesday, knowing that they were able to come off the bus, but there were 19 parents in Uvalde who weren't going to have that opportunity. It's heartbreaking. You can't even try and put yourself in their shoes, but you can't really imagine the pain and suffering that they're going through. And
for these families and for anyone else in Uvalde who has been wanting to talk with someone about this, who's been wanting to maybe get advice on how they talk to their children about this, the district has been providing counselors at the Fairplex, and other entities from across Texas have been sending their counselors and therapists to that community to help absolutely anyone who needs to chat and try and get through this. We do want to show you a tweet that we have ready that we wanted to make sure that everyone was able to see. This is
yeah, that's from the president. He said, yes, to everyone impacted by the horrific elementary school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, we grieve with you. We pray with you. We stand with you, and we're committed to turning this pain into action. You can see the photo there. That's the president putting his arm around the school superintendent, Dr. Hal Harrell. That was the moment when the president and first lady arrived at the school for that growing memorial out there to pay their respects.
And I believe we are seeing, is that Marine One on the right side of your screen?
They should be landing soon.
Kelly Air Force Base?
Yeah, they should be landing.
Very, very soon.
Yeah, that might be the press corps that you're seeing there in those choppers. But any moment now, the president and first lady should be arriving at Kelly Field in San Antonio. They're on schedule. So let's go live now back to Sarah Duran, who's there on the scene. Sarah, what can you tell us?
Hey there, Alicia and Phil. We're back here live at Kelly Field on the city's southwest side. What you're looking at right now is the support staff arriving here at this field. There's 2 of them right there. You can see those helicopters. What an incredible sight. I personally have never seen anything like this before. But like I said, we are told this is just support staff arriving here in real time right now. Next, the president and the first lady should be arriving. Let me get a little bit higher. I don't see another helicopter in the air as of right now, but you can see these 2 support staff helicopters arriving here, making their way here on the tarmac. They're going right behind Air Force One. You can see Air Force One right now on your screen. It's in the middle, parked here at Kelly Field. It's getting very loud. Those support staff helicopters are just making their way down the runway. It looks like they're turning to the left. Where they are turning now is where we are told Marine One is supposed to land here in a few minutes. That's the helicopter that is carrying President Biden and the First Lady. So as you can tell, it's starting to get very loud out here as the support staff is arriving from a very long day in Uvalde, Texas. The president has been there since 11 o'clock this morning, and it seems that they are now starting sight to see. Jeffrey, my cameraman, is showing you this live here on Campus 5 as they are making their way here at Kelly Field. From where I'm standing still, oh, Jeff, to the right, Jeff, to the right. Okay, is this the president?
No, so that'll be the third one, there'll be 3 total.
Okay.
And then after this,
okay.
The president will be next one.
Okay, I don't know if you, Phil and Alicia, I don't know if you just heard that, but I'm told this is actually a 3rd helicopter holding support staff, so a total of 3 helicopters carrying support staff for the president. A look further into the sky, I don't see another helicopter behind, but the staff here at Kelly Field say that this is typically what happens. The support staff arrives first, and then Marine One, the helicopter that carries the president and first lady, arrives after them. I'm pretty sure you can hear this, but the power of these engines is incredible. So you can see that 3rd helicopter arriving in very slowly right now. They typically, what I'm being told is that these typically arrive ahead of the president and the first lady's helicopter. We've been covering this all day. The president's visit in Uvalde, Texas. Again, we are here at Kelly Field in San Antonio, Texas on the southwest side. We were here earlier this morning when the president and the first lady arrived here just after 10 in the morning. They had quite a few people here to greet them. We are told this will be a more simple exit. Right now in front of Air Force One, we just have crew members, Air Force One crew members, waiting to greet the president and first lady. I believe Jeff is still on that 3rd support staff helicopter right there as it makes its way slowly down the runway. I'm gonna check the sky one more time.
Sarah, we're gonna go ahead and jump in over you because, as you mentioned, it is very loud. So we are having some difficulty hearing you. But thank you, Sarah. What you're looking at right now, again, is Kelly Field rather, here in San Antonio. You could see Air Force One. This is support staff that has arrived to Kelly Field. The president and first lady should be arriving in Marine One at any moment. They appear to be on schedule because they are expected to leave Kelly Field here in San Antonio and depart for Delaware around 6:45, so in less than 15 minutes. It's a big operation anytime you're moving the president across the country, and you can see that firsthand with all of the support staff, all of the equipment and everything. There's a lot of logistics and behind the scenes that you don't see that go into this.
And he has spent the majority of his day in Uvalde. Like Sarah mentioned, he landed in San Antonio at Kelly Field at about 10 this morning, and from there he flew to Uvalde. And the first thing that they did was pay their respects to the lives lost in Uvalde at Robb Elementary School, laying flowers and speaking with local leaders, community activists or leaders and members of these families, these 21 families. And they spent a couple of hours with first responders as well. But the majority of their time visiting was spent with members of these families.
Yeah, most of the time today that the president had was with families of the victims as well as some survivors. That might be Marine One, but we'll wait until it gets a little closer. And then also the president attended Mass, a noon Mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church, which is part of the Archdiocese of San Antonio, a small church. Our Jeremy Baker was there earlier. He said it can't possibly hold that many people. We do have a pool report that says about 600 people overall attended the service, and it was presided over by Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Sierra, and that lasted a little over an hour or so before the president did meet with those families of the victims and survivors. And then, as you mentioned, Alicia, after meeting with those families. He went to go meet with those first responders around 5 o'clock. Okay, so I'm being told that that is Marine One arriving at Kelly Field here in San Antonio. They appear to be on time. He left Uvalde around 6 o'clock, and the president is expected to get onto Air Force One and leave San Antonio with the First Lady in just a matter of minutes. They're expected to leave here at about 6:45.
It's hard to believe I feel like it's been forever since Tuesday. I mean, I can imagine the exhaustion that many of these families who visited with the president today, that they're feeling. As we've mentioned, the visitations for the first of these 21 victims begin tomorrow. The visitations tomorrow will be for 2 students, Mary Jo Garza, Maite Rodriguez, and Tuesday visitations will be for 2 more students, Nevea Alyssa Bravo and Jose Flores, and then teacher Irma Garcia. Of course, the story about the Garcia family is just heartbreaking because just days after her death, her husband, who we saw laying flowers at her cross at Robb Elementary School, that same afternoon when we saw him, he passed away of a heart attack. And I believe they leave behind 4 children. So that just adds to the grief that this community is feeling. And we will be there to cover these services. I mean, there are so many people who are just trying to embrace the community of Uvalde as much as they can in any way that they can. You drive to Uvalde on Highway 90, you see people holding barbecue sales to try and benefit the people who have been affected by this tragedy. You see people donating money. You see them trying to do anything they can to ease the burden on these families.
Yeah, so you're taking a look at Air Force One, waiting for the president and First Lady to walk up and get onto the plane. The president arriving from Uvalde. It's been a long day. It's a sad day. A lot of frustration and anger as well. And look, it's been a bad month for America. Keep in mind, Saturday, May 14th, a shooting in Buffalo, New York that killed 10 people. That following Tuesday, President Joe Biden flew to Buffalo to grieve with the people in Buffalo, New York. Then this last Tuesday, we all know about this terrible tragedy that happened in Uvalde. And here we are on this Sunday, President Biden grieving in Uvalde with these families. It has been a rough couple of weeks for Americans. Everybody's grieving, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of unanswered questions that still need to be answered.
The sun is setting on San Antonio. This is Marine One. We are expecting the president and the First Lady to leave Kelly Field at about 6:45 before they take off to Delaware, ending their day in South Texas. And a lot of support we are seeing is coming from San Antonio. A lot of people from San Antonio have family on the border, and Uvalde is on their way to maybe Del Rio. Had a friend from Eagle Pass stop by to pay his respects. So this is a tragedy that has certainly affected the people of San Antonio, the surrounding area, really, and
all of America.
All of America.
Yeah, the president playing that role, as we say, consoler in chief, the part that is part of the job, unfortunately, but no president wants to ever have to respond to a mass shooting. There's been many that we can name off over the last few decades. This is all also reminiscent of 2017 when Sutherland Springs happened. Then it was Vice President Mike Pence who made a visit to San Antonio and then Sutherland Springs to console families then. A small rural Texas town that pretty much nobody outside of Texas had ever heard of. Even Texans had maybe not have ever heard of Sutherland Springs. And now, fast forward from 2017 to 2022, and now we have another president arriving in San Antonio, went out to Uvalde to console these families, and now Uvalde, unfortunately, joined Sutherland Springs as two small rural Texas towns that will forever be known but unfortunately under some terrible, terrible circumstances.
I mean, absolutely. In just minutes, we are expecting the president to walk out of Marine One, make his way over to Air Force One. We do have reporter Sarah Duran on the scene. We were speaking with her. As you can imagine, it is very loud right there at Kelly Field. So we have been saying all day that this has just been a very tight schedule, but the majority of the President's Day, the President and First Lady's Day, has been spent with members, family members of the victims and survivors' families, followed by an hour with first responders at Garner Field in Uvalde. About a 35-minute flight from Uvalde here to San Antonio, and he is expected to land back in Delaware at about 11 o'clock Eastern Time.
Yeah, of course, a lot of Americans wondering what happens next. A lot of people want accountability. We know the DOJ is now opening up a review into what happened when law enforcement arrived and how that all unfolded. A lot of unanswered questions and anger and frustration as that goes. Congressman Joaquin Castro telling me earlier that there has to be accountability, but we got to get all the facts first and see what happened, who made some of these calls and whatnot. Of course, the DOJ will conduct that review and make their conclusions public, so we should know. Of course, a lot of Americans, too, wanting change, but we've heard that time and time again. But there's a lot of Americans who are skeptical that there will actually be change because, you know, again, Joe Biden was vice president 10 years ago when Sandy Hook happened, and 20 kids were killed and 6 teachers were killed. And here we are 10 years later, another elementary school massacre, 19 kids killed tragically and 2 teachers. And so a lot of calls for change, but what that change looks like remains to be seen.
And we have seen a couple of ideas being pitched to try and figure out a solution. For example, you have Senator Ted Cruz, who pitched a one-door policy at schools across the United States that maybe could help prevent these situations in the future, and that certainly has been met with some scrutiny. But those are the conversations that are being had. You have a lot of senators who are open to change, saying on the record that they are willing to listen and find a bipartisan way for change.
And so what you're looking at now is Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, and Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady. They just got off of Marine One there. It looks like the First Lady is waving goodbye to the pilot there. It's been a long day. It's been a jam-packed day, but a much-needed day for a lot of people. So the President and First Lady are holding hands right now as they walk up to Air Force One. They will leave via Air Force One in just a matter of a few minutes. They will leave San Antonio and head to Delaware. They're expected to arrive in Delaware around 11 o'clock tonight. The day started for them early, leaving Delaware, I believe, around 7 in the morning. So here you go. Again, you can see the President and First Lady holding hands with Marine One in the background. They will say farewell to South Texas for now. Earlier today, when the president arrived, he was greeted by Mayor Ron Nirenberg. They were briefly there before departing and jumping on to Marine One and heading to Uvalde, where they went to the school, where there is that growing memorial, and then they went to Mass, and then they met with families of the victims and survivors. Finally, they met with first responders around 5 o'clock at Garner Field in Uvalde. But you're taking a live look now of President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden boarding Air Force One as they get ready to depart San Antonio as the sun is getting closer to going down. You can see the president waving. And there he goes with the First Lady into Air Force One and get ready to leave South Texas and head back to Delaware.
When he was returning to his vehicle after, I believe, the church service this morning, you had some people, as he was getting back in the car, yell, "Do something." And right before he went to sit down and close the door, he said, "We will," twice. So you had mixed reactions there in Uvalde, but certainly some important conversations were had today with parents of the victims, with families of the victims, with families of the survivors to see what we can do from here.
Yeah. We don't know yet, we probably won't know what exactly was said between the president and those families, understandably so. Those are private conversations, but we do know the president has been calling for change, especially common sense gun laws, although for the most part he has said it's time for Congress to act. Congress needs to do something. Earlier today I was speaking with Congressman Joaquin Castro. He said, look, Democrats have two choices. They either get rid of the filibuster so they don't have to rely on Republicans and get something passed, or they have to convince 10 Republican senators to jump on board with them. Now, will anything actually be done? That remains to be seen. We have heard some senators say this might actually be the time. A lot of Americans, understandably so, are skeptical about that, but we'll see what happens. As you mentioned, people in Uvalde shouting at the president while he was there, we need change, we need help. So again, you're taking a live look at Air Force One as the sun goes down here in South Texas. The president on board Air Force One with the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. It's been a long day, a much needed day, though, depending on who you ask as far as the president's visit. But they will leave here at any moment and head back to Delaware. And then from there, as you mentioned, Alicia, tomorrow visitations begin and a whole new step in this healing process.
For these next few weeks, we're going to continue with these funeral services. And they have been taken care of for these families. You have donors who are trying to help ease that burden for these families during this just unfathomable time as they lay their loved ones to rest. Right now, these families should be preparing for summer vacation, preparing for summer camps, preparing for maybe, a pool day. It's Memorial Day weekend, but instead they are planning for their funerals. And you have one family in particular who lost two members. The family of Irma Garcia. That just days after Mrs. Garcia's death, she was a teacher in the 4th grade classroom. Her husband died of a heart attack. And that is a very real thing, doctors say, to die of heartbreak. I was reading, of course, social media has just been flooding with tributes and memories and speaking more about the character of these kids and how just delightful each one of them were, and these teachers. I read that Irma Garcia's husband was a manager of an HEB in Del Rio. So he has touched very, very many lives, as have all of the victims from this tragedy. We have some of the children who aspired to start a career taking care of animals, maybe a veterinarian. You have other children who wanted to be artists. You had a graduation ceremony the day before this shooting happened, or a graduation tradition, I should say. The seniors of the local high school walked through the hallways of Robb Elementary School giving high fives to those children, and I'm sure some of those children said, you know what, one day that's going to be me. Yeah, absolutely. Again, you're taking a live look at Air Force One, getting ready to leave San Antonio. This is at Kelly Field. The President and First Lady on board Air Force One as we get ready to conclude his visit here in South Texas. It's been a long day, a much needed day depending on who you talk to. The President did arrive this morning around 10 o'clock. He was greeted by Mayor Ron Nirenberg, quickly jumped onto Marine One, and then arrived in Uvalde around 11 and was greeted by Governor Greg Abbott, the First Lady of Texas, as well as the Mayor of Uvalde, Don McLaughlin. Congressman Tony Gonzalez was there. State Senator Roland Gutierrez was there. Dr. Jill Biden and President Biden then went to Robb Elementary School and paid their respects to those 21 lives cut way too short. And then from there, they went to Sacred Heart Catholic Church and Mass
with about 600 people in attendance. And Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Siller led that mass. And then from there, the President and First Lady met with families of the victims and survivors, and understandably so, that was where the bulk of the time was spent, about three and a half hours. And then the President and First Lady met with first responders just about 2 hours ago. And then they left Uvalde around 6, and here we are now at 6:48. The President and First Lady on Air Force One getting ready to leave South Texas as the sun continues to set here on this Sunday. As you mentioned, it is Memorial Day weekend. Tomorrow we should be focused on the live sacrifice by some of our nation's heroes. And here we are also remembering the young lives cut too short.
I do want to mention a quote that the pool reporter who was at the Mass said really quickly as Air Force One is taking off from San Antonio's Kelly Field back to Delaware, again set to arrive at about 11 o'clock Eastern time tonight, carrying the President and First Lady. The Archbishop said in the Mass today, our response must be one of hope and healing. We must move forward together. And he urged the community to resolve to support one another with respect for our differences. So I thought that was a beautiful thing to say, because so many conversations are happening right now. You have people with opinions on both sides about what should be done from this, but I thought that message of peace and respect was much needed today, especially for these families who are caught in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, and it was less than 2 weeks ago, May 17th, that President Joe Biden made a visit to Buffalo, New York to grieve with family members there who lost 10 lives in Buffalo, New York because of a gunman that went into a grocery store and caused that tragedy. And here we are less than 2 weeks later, the President playing that role of consoler-in-chief again, this time here in South Texas, arriving in San Antonio and then going to Uvalde to console those 21 families who have lost their loved ones, who have unfortunately had to deal with the unspeakable tragedy that we all know of.
And you had the Vice President traveling this weekend as well, Kamala Harris. She said the country is experiencing an epidemic of hate. She made that comment yesterday. She was speaking at the funeral of Ruth Whitfield, one of the victims from the Buffalo mass shooting at that grocery store. Harris said hate was the through line, so the common denominator in the shootings in Texas, Buffalo, Atlanta, and Orlando. So she said that hate should not win. She said the time is now for people to stand up. She says that we will not be separated or be made to live in fear by those who are motivated by hate. So President and Vice President having to travel over this weekend for 2 different mass shootings in the month of May here in America, one of which has very deeply touched South Texas, from the town of Uvalde, a little more than 15,000 people who are still trying to get day by day, just trying to figure out how to begin to move on, or to cope, I should say, with what has happened in their community.
Yeah, and we can't forget there were still 5 people in hospitals here in San Antonio. We do know that 2 adult patients are in fair condition right now at BAMC. There's also 3 patients currently at University Hospital. A 66-year-old woman is currently in fair condition. That would be an improvement for her since last checked. There's also a 10-year-old girl in serious condition at University Hospital, and then there's a 9-year-old girl in good condition at University Hospital. So as all of this has been playing out over the last 5 days, you still have 5 people who survived this tragedy that are still in a hospital, you know, hopeful to get out soon. We don't know when they're going to get out, but people will obviously continue to keep them in their prayers, as well as the people who are trying to heal from losing a loved one.
What we're also continuing to see this weekend, our vigils. We had one in El Paso today. Remember 2019, you had dozens of lives lost, the majority Hispanic, just like we did see in this shooting Tuesday, I should say. And El Paso, they, in their vigil, said the names aloud of each victim. We're seeing tributes like that from community members, from sports teams, San Antonio FC. At 21 minutes, was it correct?
Yeah, last night at the 21-minute mark, they paid tribute and took a knee. So again, in case you're just joining us, this is Air Force One taking off from Kelly Field here in San Antonio. President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden inside Air Force One as you see it lift off from the ground, headed back to Delaware after what's been a long day, a day full of emotions, grief, sadness, anger, frustration. But there you have Air Force One leaving South Texas after a long day. A day of prayer, a day of healing, a day of meeting with families of victims, a day of meeting with survivors, a day of meeting with first responders, as well as a day to pay respect at Robb Elementary School, where there is a growing memorial. Of course, that terrible tragedy started outside the school, really. So you're taking a live look at Air Force One headed back to Delaware right now.
What we are seeing a lot of, Phil, this week, people wearing maroon, the colors for Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District. We will have more on this tribute from people all around South Texas coming up tonight at 10 o'clock. And of course, our hearts are with you, Uvalde. We will continue to pray for you, and we will have the very latest coming up tonight at 10 on air, and you can always get your news anytime online.
Yeah, for now, we want to leave you to remember the victims, their names, their faces, and the loss that we're all feeling.
Learned spectacularly in recent years, you know. People invent truths. You have to be skeptical.
As we prepare to leave the Nymphaeum Museum, we couldn't help thinking about how time tramples even the mightiest of empires, turning lavish gardens into underground parking lots.
What do you think Caligula would think of what's happened to his gardens?
I think he'd be in total disagreement.